Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone to this Algolia live coding session for February 2024. Today's topic is capturing events for smarter search with Algolia and Segment. Very glad to have you here today. I am your host, Chuck Meyer. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Algolia, and today I'm going to be joined by Joe Ayoub, who is a staff engineer at Segment. Hey, Joe.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Looking forward to showing you some stuff about Segment.
Very excited. Very excited. For those who haven't been to one of our live coding sessions before, this is in fact live. It is being recorded, so folks can watch it later. But for those of you who did join us today, this is interactive. We're going to be doing some coding live. We're going to be talking about some topics, but we would love to hear from you. Be active on the chat, chat with each other. If you have a question for Joe or myself, I would ask you, there's a Q&A tab. If you could put your questions in the Q&A tab, it just helps me keep track of them. I'm going to be writing code. Joe's going to be writing code. It's a lot of windows to look at. It kind of helps us to kind of make sure that we can focus and try and answer your questions live whenever possible. For those that don't know Algolia, I'll tell you a little bit about us. We provide a set of hosted APIs that empower developers to quickly build search and discovery into your web and mobile applications. So we're kind of a one-stop shop for search recommendations and all of that. Joe, do you want to tell us a little bit about Segment for those who don't know?
Sure. So Segment is what's called a customer data platform, or a CDP. They've been around for about 7 or 8 years now. And excuse me, the purpose of a CDP is to help you collect analytics events from all your different customer touch points. So whether that's a website, mobile apps, backend services, etc. All that data comes into Segment, and Segment is able to then federate out that data to hundreds of different, what we call destination platforms. At the same time, you can use Segment to build audiences and to compute additional information about your users, and to sync that data onto destination platforms as well. Algolia is a destination platform that connects to Segment, and we're going to be showing you how to collect events into Segment and forward them onto Algolia.
That's a great way to put it. I'm very excited about how our two products kind of can connect with each other. That's it for the slides. I'm going to jump off of that and let's get into the conversation here. So just to kind of make this practical, I have a little application that I think we're going to be playing with today. And for those that have been to Algolia events in the past, maybe you've attended a DevCon or DevBit, we're a little obsessed with Pokemon. It started a couple years back. It's a long story, but bottom line is I've got this Pokemon demo site. And for folks that have used Algolia's front-end libraries like Instant Search, this will probably look very familiar. We've got a search box here. I can search for good old Pikachu or what have you. We've got some facet filters here. We've got a lot of different ways to sort of engage with these products that are, in this case, Pokemon cards. And the reason I'm using this demo today is this drills a little further. It actually has sort of this product landing page or product details page, right, with a little bit more information about this particular card, and this button that allows you to sort of catch this Pokemon. Right now it just says boop, not very exciting. But so there's a lot of engagement available on this site. And so I thought this would be kind of a great kind of demo site to use to start talking about events and why events are important. And there are lots of different reasons to capture events. We, on the Algolia side, are obsessed with search. So we like to capture events because they allow us to help improve rankings, help us provide recommendations to customers, do sort of all of the things, take all of this kind of valuable data that's coming out of engaging with this search interface and use it to improve results for the next person coming along. But that's just one reason why you would collect events, right, Joe?
Yeah, there's obviously lots of reasons why you'd want to collect analytics events. Understanding what your customers are doing, learning how to optimize the interactions, how to drive users down the funnel, etc. One of the main goals about collecting events is to make sure that your data is clean and that it's trustworthy, and that's kind of where Segment will come into it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, before we get into Segment, I just want to very quickly show if you're coming and saying, hey, I'm interested in starting to send events for search, or for, conversion rate, collection, all of these different sort of reasons that you would collect them. Um, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I just wanted to show you real quick. There is one thing you can do just kind of for the search side of this equation, that allows you to kind of quick and dirty get some event information quickly. And this is if you're using our instant search library, which is kind of our front end library for building search experiences. So you can see this application is written in React. And we are using instant search here. So I've got a bunch of kind of pre-baked widgets that I'm pulling in. And one thing that I can do with modern versions of instant search, particularly instant search React version 7, which is the version I'm using here, is I can actually go and there's this toggle to turn on our Insights API. And Insights, we'll be talking a lot about this today. Insights is the Algolia API endpoint for consuming events specific to search. And so one thing I can do here, I don't know why that converted back to false. Let's get this to true. I'm going to go ahead and just simply turn that on and run my application. And what you're going to see here is with this turned on, if I do a search for our Insights API, you should see that as I start typing in here, I'm automatically sending a series of events to our Insights API. These are what we call view events, right? So, and this is something Joe and I were talking about just before we came online, right? There might be some collision as far as language here. In the world of search, for us, a view event is whenever something gets displayed as a search result, and then a click event is when you actually click through that search result onto a product detail page. There's a little bit of overloading on what constitutes a click event. It'll probably vary from site to site, and you'll have your own opinions on kind of what it is. But you'll see here that we've got these view events, and I've actually got a very basic click event as well. So I can actually see that this item was clicked. I get some position information here, and I get like an anonymous user token. I get the bare minimum, basically, to be able to start tracking which results users are actually interacting with, which is actually enough to kind of use some of our advanced features like dynamic re-ranking and some of these things. But this is the big bummer here, is even with this turned on, I still get nothing on this conversion event here, right? Because this conversion event, I'm no longer within my search UI. I'm off on a product detail page. I'm outside the context of search. And instant search can't help you here. And this is where I think it starts to get really interesting to start to use a mature product like Segment to capture this information. And I think there's a couple of other reasons to do this too, right? Like, frankly, Algolia isn't the only ones that's going to want this information, right? And I think, this is where we can start talking about Segment and maybe where Segment could help. But the first thing I'm going to do before I hand off to you, Joe, and maybe talk a little bit about Segment and how to get going with it, is I'm going to turn this back off for now, just so that we don't end up with double events later. But tell me about, so now that we've talked a little bit about sort of these click and conversion events, why don't I hand off to you, Joe, and you can tell us a little bit about Segment and how Segment comes into the picture here.
Sure. Okay. Let me share my screen then.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll just right size this a little bit. Hopefully that's a good size so everyone can see. Okay, so when you log into Segment, you will see something that looks like this, okay? All this is showing is the various different sources that you have connected. In my case, because I've worked at Segment for a long time, I have a lot of sources connected. I've got Android sources, various different SaaS products, coding sources, etc. Okay. And on the right-hand side, I've got all the different destinations that are connected. So I've got Algolia connected, Facebook ads, Iterable, there's Braze, TikTok, Google Analytics, everything. So I literally have probably about 100 different sources and 100 different destinations connected. So the UI is actually a little bit slow because of it. So what you would do with Segment is initially you'll just create a source. Okay. Let me just do that. In fact, I created one right here a few minutes ago. When you create a source, it gives you a thing called a write key. That's a unique identifier for a source. If your source is for sending web events into Segment, you will paste a bit of JavaScript into the head tag of your website, or as Chuck is going to show in a couple of minutes, there's a different library you can use if you're using React. Or if you're sending data from a mobile app, there's an SDK you can use in various different mobile languages, or there's like server-side libraries for Node, C#, Java, etc. There's probably about 15 or 16 of them. So if you do want to send data into Segment, it's actually really, really simple. You create a source like this, you grab the write key, you click into the debugger, you can open up Postman like this, you paste your write key into Postman, whoops, grab the actual write key here. There we go. And you literally just post a JSON payload into this URL. That's a track event. What this is going to say is this user here with this user ID performed this event, and here's some information about this event. So I can call this event anything I want. So I could call it test event. And I can put any info I want in here. So top1 equals whatever. And if I send it in, the data should arrive pretty much in real time. There it is. And I can inspect it. I can see the payload that has come in. I can see the properties of the event here, the event name, timestamps, etc. There's a bit of extra information that gets added. Now, if I was to have sent this event from the front end of a website, there would have been additional bits of information that would have been collected, like some environment information and stuff like that. So I do have a website here that is actually connected to the same source. And instead of clicking on a button to fire the event, I will literally just fire it through the console here. So I'm interacting with the Segment library here. I'm going to do test event 2. And if I go back here, there it is. So that's arrived. And you can see that Segment has picked up a bunch of page information like the page path, query string, title, etc. And yeah, some basic other information, time zone, user agent. It knows which Segment library was used, the Segment JavaScript library, etc. So that's how you get data into Segment. Now, sending data out of Segment, you will go up to your source here, to the Overview tab, you scroll down, and there's a button here for adding destinations. You can see I've got Algolia connected already, even though it's disabled. You click on that destination button, and then you can select from hundreds of different integrations like TikTok, Google, whatever, including Algolia. And those integrations are basically transformation code that takes a Segment API call, like the track call that I just fired into Segment, and it remaps it to an API call that destination platform understands. Okay. So I actually have already connected Algolia. I just haven't put in any credentials yet. So you can see if I click into Algolia here, Algolia expects an app ID, an API key, and those are the basic settings that you would provide. Once you put those in, you click Enable Destination, and then you go into the Mappings tab, and you can see that there are some basic mappings, kind of pre-packaged mappings that have been set up already. So in this case, this will send a product viewed event into Algolia. This will send a product added event. So product viewed is a user viewing a product on the website. Product added is a user adding a product to the cart. A conversion event here is getting mapped to a Segment event, etc. Okay, or sorry, a Segment order completed event is getting mapped to an Algolia conversion event. Okay,
very cool.
So all of these different mappings, if I go over here and click into edit mapping, let's say I want to have a look at what's happening for a Segment order completed event, which is a purchase event. If we click over here on edit mapping, you can see that up here we have a trigger. So this is the type of track event that will trigger this mapping. So if I was to go back in here, do order completed, that would then, if I was to fire that event in, it will invoke this mapping. And then down here, I have all the fields from the Segment event on the left-hand side and what they're getting mapped to for the payload that gets sent to Algolia. Okay. I don't know, Chuck, if you want us to actually demo this, or we'll come back to this later.
I mean, I think this is it's what we can kind of show it now, and then we'll show maybe instrumenting a website in a little bit. But
Yeah,
the one thing I really wanted to comment on here is when you talk about those events on the segment side, the one thing that I think is really interesting is that you're very opinionated about events, which I think is cool. I think that's a good thing, right? Like you actually have some sort of strong opinions about what are quality values to have in each of these different types of events, and those are well defined.
that's right. Yeah. So um, a lot of the customers that Segment works with are e-commerce based customers, and an e-commerce funnel is an e-commerce funnel. There's generally going to be some sort of ad interaction. There's going to be maybe some search performed on the website or the mobile app. There'll be product views, product search filterings, adding items to the cart, removing them from the cart, starting the purchase path, adding payment information, and then completing the purchase. So we tend to see those same types of events occurring all the time. So Segment has defined this, what we call an e-commerce specification or an e-commerce spec for Segment events. And it's not something that customers absolutely have to adhere to. It's more of a recommendation. So if a customer was implementing Segment on their website, for example, and they wanted to tell Segment that a user has searched for products, they would fire a track event into Segment with the event name as product searched.
Mm.
Or if the user viewed a list of products, the event name should be products list viewed. If they filtered that list, it would be product list filtered. And so we have about 15 or 20 different event names. Here you can see the order completed. That's when a user makes a purchase. This one over here, product added, is when a user adds an item to the cart. Product clicked when they click on it, product viewed when they view on it. And if I take this event name and go down a little bit on this same page, you'll see that we've defined the properties or the fields that a customer might want to consider collecting when they fire in, for example, a product added to cart event.
Hmm.
You typically have a cart ID of some sort. You're probably going to have a product ID, a name for the product, price for the product, a quantity, etc. And we have an example here of what one of those API calls would look like in JavaScript. Here you can see the name of the product and then all the various properties. Now, some customers will implement it like this, some won't.
Mhm.
It doesn't really matter if they do or not. If they send in a product added event and instead of product ID, they just call it ID, that's okay. They can come into Segment and they can remap here. They can remap the fields basically. In this case, I don't think we have a products array, do we? Product details.
Should be, yeah.
So in this case,
Good.
like they can just say, you know what, I want to send ID instead of whoops, it'll be like this. ID instead of product ID. Yeah, over to product ID in this is probably not a great example, but the customer can remap anything inside Segment anyway using the user interface.
Well, I mean, that's interesting too, because we're sort of obsessed with the concept of object IDs in the Algolia world. And so if you're coming from Algolia first, you might be used to thinking in terms of object ID, or it could be that maybe it's something as simple as you're not into snake case and you're doing camel case and it's product ID with a capital I, right?
Yeah, exactly. And being able to have the flexibility to send in the data in a format that maybe your engineers have already implemented, and then being able to reshape that inside the Segment user interface and forward it onto Algolia in a way that Algolia expects is quite powerful. So it means that you can instrument your website once, and then most of the time through the UI, reconfigure the data to go to multiple different platforms. In most cases, you actually don't need to do any reconfiguring at all because the mappings that have been provided by default in Segment are usually well thought through.
Right. And we do actually have a question. And I might modify the question a little bit. The actual question is, what if we have an event that needs to go to different Algolia destinations? And the specific example was you have indices in, say, like multiple continents, EMEA and US. Um, from our perspective, I think like you can still hit the Insights API endpoint. You just sort of make sure that you're using the appropriate index when you send the event. But it does kind of open that larger question of if an event's coming into Segment, there are there capabilities to route it to multiple endpoints for the same event?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely, yes. So you can connect multiple destinations of the same type, particularly if they are what we call a cloud-based destination, where the transformations happen on the server side. I won't go into that too much,
Mhm.
but essentially you can filter events based on certain criteria and send them to one destination, and then you can apply different filtering to send certain events to other destinations. So for example, for Algolia here, I could click in here and click onto filters, and I could create a new filter that says, do not send the event to Algolia if, or only send the event to Algolia if,
Mm.
and then I can say, instead of the event name, maybe a certain field in here, it could be that it's, if the referrer, properties.referrer contains, you know, like EU, or the properties.url contains whatever, you can do that
Yeah.
type of thing. So you could have multiple instances of your destinations configured with different filters. And as the events come into Segment, the filters would kind of route the data into various different destinations.
That's
Did that
cool.
answer your question?
Well, you'll have to, it answered my question. We'll have to see if it
Right.
answered the question on the chat as well. Let us know if it did or not. And I think this, I mean, this is potentially useful too, obviously, for like if you have like a ping or some sort of like, something that's constantly sort of polling, you can filter all of that out very easily. I mean, obviously you could filter on the front side, but if it gets to segment, this is a great way to sort of make sure it doesn't actually, you know, dilute your data.
Absolutely, yeah. There are more complex or there are other ways to filter data as well. You can filter out, you can create a thing called a tracking plan. So
Mm,
you define the events that you're expecting from your website or whatever. You could say, okay, I'm expecting a link clicked event, and link clicked events should have, let me see, they would have like a URL or a link text or whatever. And you can define this tracking plan for all your events. And then if any payload comes into Segment that does not match something in your tracking plan, you can decide if you want to block it, if you want to route it to a Slack channel, or if you want to
mm.
allow it through an alert or whatever. So there's quite a powerful capability in Segment for keeping your data clean, particularly to stop bad data from going through Segment and onto your dozen or 20 destinations that you might have connected.
Right on. Well, why don't we dig in? Let me go ahead and see if I can start instrumenting my code here.
Right.
And while we do the kind of the switch over, we do have another question here, and that's around those defined e-commerce events. The question is like, what is the main benefit of following that spec? Like, is it a industry spec, or is it sort of just kind of a nice guidance to give you like a starting point? What would you say the main benefit of using that is?
If you are working, if you are an e-commerce company and you want to start tracking analytics, it's kind of a best practice for what you'd want to collect, essentially. It's a very standard. Most e-commerce funnels are very standard, and this gives you a way to think about how to track all the data that you're going to need without having to reinvent the wheel. It does match to other e-commerce specifications for some of the larger platforms out there. So for example, Google Analytics 4, their event specification matches nearly identically to ours. Facebook is very similar, and a lot of the newer ad platforms, they have specifications that are very similar to Segments. So if you do decide to follow Segments e-commerce specification, it will make it a lot easier for you to send your data onto the platforms that you've connected Segment to.
And I'll be perfectly honest, I am approaching this from a search perspective. We too have a lot of e-commerce customers, but I'm not as savvy in e-commerce, and I'm learning as we go. And the more we talk, the more I realize, there's a lot of education to sort of get everything to line up properly. There's a lot of opportunity to make it line up regardless, but I want to make sure that we're course correcting and doing things right today. So keep me honest as I sort of build this stuff out. Okay.
Right.
Cool. Okay. Well, as you mentioned earlier, Joe, rather than using the sort of the piece of JavaScript, since I am in React world on this one, I'm going to go ahead and install this library. So this is your analytics. This is the same analytics library, right? But it's kind of tuned towards Next-based applications, React applications. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in, hopefully. Let's see. Maybe I should have had that preloaded. Uh-oh. We might be using your header here in a second. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Now it's loading. And so while that's kind of coming in, what the way I kind of did this originally, and I'm going to do it again now, is I kind of made this utility function just to kind of build out the segment piece of it. I'm not saying, I don't know if this is a best practice, but it's kind of something we've done with Algolia in the past. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to go ahead and use that here. And so I think what we want is we want this analytics browser. Is that right?
Yep.
Is the piece that we want to bring in. Okay. And
So
then,
that's just the segment library.
okay. And then as you were showing earlier, we need to initialize that with a key here, right?
Yes.
So I actually have that stored with, oh, whoa. Wow. Sorry about that. My keyboard went crazy on me. I actually have that stored in environment variable. Let me see what I called it. I called that segment right key as my fingers slowly warm up here. And then what I do is it's that same analytics piece, but we go ahead and we call that out of the browser. Oh, why didn't that come through? Goodness. All right, I'll get my rhythm here in a second. I'm not gonna trust that right now. And we do a load and we bring in that right key. And is there anything else we need? Oh, actually, we have to
That's
say it's a key value pair. So we do a right key. Okay, cool. And then this was something cool that you showed me when we were working earlier, right? Which is that ability to sort of send events directly from the console. I can do that by essentially tying
yeah.
analytics to my window, right?
Yeah. So instead of having to when when you're an engineer and you're in the middle of instrumenting your website, instead of writing all the code straight into your editor, sometimes it's nice to just write it as JavaScript in the Chrome console. So this will let you do that. You can, because you're attaching the segment analytics library to the window, you can just do analytics dot whatever track, and you can just fire segment events directly from the Chrome console.
Cool. Okay, cool. So let me go ahead. This is just the header that's got my little Pokemon logo and stuff in it. And again, this was another thing where I think you were kind of cringing a little bit at sort of how I set things up. But I am going to go ahead and bring my analytics in up here in the header. So bring that in. Um, that's okay. And then the other thing I'm doing, this is a total cheat, but because I don't have authentication on my page, I literally have an environment variable called user token. So we're going to assume that that user token is actually coming in through an authentication mechanism or something like that, right? And that just kind of gives us an authenticated user that we can track. Because I wanted to show kind of the cool ways that Segment keeps track of that user for you, right? I think in a perfect world, the assumption is that user is authenticated and you're sort of injecting that from whatever that authentication method it is. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I can call analytics here. And it is, what is it, identify?
So there's really two different types of segment API calls that
Hmm.
most customers will use. One is to track or to tell Segment or whatever other platform that a user has performed some sort of action. Like
Hmm.
basically, it's an analytics event. We call that API call track. So it would be analytics.track, name of the event, so link clicked or form submitted or item purchased or whatever. The other type of API call that customers use a lot is identify. And identify is when you want to tell Segment or any other downstream platform that you know who the user is, or that you know something about the user. So if you know what the user's user ID is, or if you know that their name is Joe, or that they work for Microsoft, or anything like that, or maybe that they're interested in football or anything, we call those things traits. and you would
Okay.
just populate an identify call with some traits, and you would send it on to Segment, and Segment can then map it onto other platforms.
Cool.
So in this case, Chuck is literally just saying, hey, we know about this user with this user ID. That's all that's
Hmm.
happening on line 7.
Right. And I don't have it here, but you'll have to trust me because we're in a Pokemon theme. Our user ID is Ash Ketchum. For you Pokemon fans out there, it's the main until recently the main character of the Pokemon series. So now we're going to say, hey, welcome Segment. Glad to have you in my application. Here's what I know about the user of the current user of the page. And just to kind of fire off something here, I'm going to go ahead and um, let it know that, hey, there's a page load event, right? That's kind of a nice, simple event that I can send along.
Yeah, so a page event is, as the user navigates through your website, it's just going to collect a breadcrumb trail of all the different pages that the user has visited. It makes sense in the case of a traditional website, maybe not as much sense if you've got a single page app. But yes, a page event is just going to contain basic details about the page that the user visited.
Okay. And obviously, we're not sending these to Algolia Insights anymore. So I think Segment is where we want to track, see where our network traffic's going now. Is that true?
Yes, that's right. So you can see
Cool.
the little
Wow.
I there is for the identify call, and the little P is for the track call.
There we go. There's our user ID. Ash Ketchum is coming through. And then with the page load, I still have my context, my user context here.
That's right.
That's cool. And that'll follow me throughout the website now.
Exactly. And as Federico mentioned here in the chat, if you didn't have a user ID, that's okay because Segment assigns an anonymous ID to the user anyway. It's just a value that's stored in a cookie on the browser. It will last a few weeks, and depending on the browser, it'll get wiped. But if you, I don't know if you can just scroll up a little bit there to show everyone the anonymous ID in the payload.
Right here.
So that thing there, yeah, it's just a good.
Very cool. And this is where like I would love to continue this conversation as we go because and on the I'm sure it's the same for other folks, but it's definitely true for Algolia. We love a full end-to-end narrative for our users. And so if there is a point halfway through the process where a user decides to identify themselves through some mechanism, logs in, etc., that ability to sort of have an anonymous ID but be able to stitch that back to the authenticated user becomes
Yeah.
incredibly important. And I'm sure that's probably true for other uses of Segment as well.
Yeah, that's right. So within Segment, there's a module you can purchase. It's an optional thing, but it allows you to configure ID resolution rules. So you could say a user can only have a maximum of one user ID, but they can have up to 20 anonymous IDs, and they're allowed to have. You could even specify that an email address is an identifier or a phone
Hmm,
number is an identifier, etc. Um, yeah.
cool. Okay. Well, for folks that live within the Algolia world, or if you're not familiar with it, um, we are obsessed with a search, right? We're obsessed with someone engaging. Oh, when did I turn water on? Turn that off. Engaging with the search interface. And that search world is all tied to specific queries. And each of those queries is given a unique identifier. And that's going to be a crucial piece of data that we're going to want to ingest, or we're going to want to sort of inject into all of the events that are going to carry on from the search. We want to make sure that everything that happens after this all ties back to me just typing Pikachu right there. And so in order to do that, we need to surface that query ID. That ID lives within the Algolia engine. We use it when we're sort of keeping track of the search events internally, but we want to make sure that that gets pushed out so that we can use it later. And the way that you do that is you add a configuration setting called Click Analytics. So here you can see I'm back within my instance search interface here, and I'm in a configuration piece here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an additional parameter here called Click Analytics, and I'm going to set that equal to true. And with that on, that means that all of the kind of the useful information about the search is actually going to get pushed out and sent to me along with the search results. So that'll be things like the query ID, positional information, all of that is now going to be available to me. And then by continuation, will be available to segment. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that all of this information, right? Remember, my end goal is this conversion event here. So I need to make sure that this information actually gets to this product details page. And so in order to do that, I'm going to do a couple of things here. Well, I'm actually going to do the simplest way to do it, which is I'm going to inject it into my query string, right? And so if you've used Instant Search before, you'll know that we've got sort of this hit component, and the hit is what we call each of the individual results, and it allows for templating. And so this is sort of the template for my hit. You can see it's got, it's a giant link, it's got the image, it's got some alt text, right? And essentially this is kind of each of the Pokemon cards. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just add a query string onto this link, and I'm going to inject into that query string a couple of values from my hit. So again, because I've got Click Analytics turned on, this is all kind of baked into my hit, and I get these private values for query ID and positional information. And so I'm going to go ahead and just inject those in here. Um, is this the right way? Depends on kind of who you ask. If you have a Redux store, or you have some other way of using local storage. Obviously, we're in React. We could theoretically just use state information. What I like about this, particularly in demo world, is it's very visible, right? We can see it. It's easy to kind of grab off of here. Um, and there's some advantages for being able to bookmark and things like that as well, right? So if someone wants to come back later, they'll have access to it. But let me make sure that this is actually working. Typing and talking at the same time can be a bit of a challenge. So let me make sure that when I click through here now, okay, it kind of disappeared off there, but you could see we got a query ID in there. We'll go back and actually, let's hover over, and that should help. So you can see now I've got my query ID. Oh, my hit position. I think I missed a $sign, didn't I? Let's make sure that's coming through as well. Okay, there we go. Position 1, position 2, position 3. It's kind of small down there, but you can kind of see it. So this will allow us to kind of take this information along with us to the product detail page, right? Because again, we're outside the context of instant search. We no longer kind of have that within our instant search components. We have to bring that along ourselves. So now we've got that info here. And Joe, this was kind of the first interesting discussion that you and I had around sort of instrumenting for segment, because my natural inclination now would be to add like an on-click event here, right? And actually show a click right here by through some sort of like click handler. Um, but there can be challenges with that, right?
Yeah, so triggering an analytics event using any type of library when the user clicks on a link can generate like a race condition essentially, because the page is told that it's got to be torn down and redirected to a new page. But at the same time, you're trying to actually fire an analytics event using JavaScript. So sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. So there's a couple of different approaches that we recommend. One is maybe wait until the next page loads and then trigger the like link clicked or product clicked event. Or you can introduce a delay before
Mm.
the redirect happens. But that's not, there's a lot of people that will probably shout at you if you slow down your website.
Especially in e-commerce, right? Where every millisecond counts. So, okay, so we're going to follow that best practice here. And what I've done is I've jumped over to this card page, right? This is, as we look over kind of into this page here, this is the page where we actually render out our card and all the details, and we put this button in. And so I'm going to go ahead and bring segment in here to this component. Maybe we would want it to have been reusable, but I mean, the nice thing about React is we'll do some tree shaking and stuff. I think this will all kind of come out in the wash. Again, I'm sorry if I'm making anyone cringe with sort of the way I'm kind of putting stuff together here, but it's a demo. But the other pieces of this I'm going to put in, I do want to go ahead and grab out those, let me see here. Yeah, okay. I'm going to pull out the search parameters. So I'm going to get this use search params. I'm using React Router here for kind of putting all of this stuff together. So the React Router has a nice way of kind of parsing this stuff back out. So we'll bring in use search params here. And then the one last piece, in order to send Algolia events, it needs to be tied to the index name, the actual index where it was searched from. Um, this is going to be something that if we have time, we can talk about later, but I think Joe and I are going to be talking about it more later as well. You really want to make sure that you're tying back to the actual index where the search occurred, right? So if you have multiple replicas around sort orders for pricing or, popularity or whatever, you want to make sure you're tied back to that. I'm using a single index for this whole demo, so I can just kind of pull it out of here. But that's another thing that you're going to want to kind of think about how you're going to store it and how you're going to pull it back out again. We're going to do a couple things here. I think the first thing I'm going to do is let's handle that clicked event. So what I'm going to do here is right before I return my page, I'm going to go ahead and pull out these search params. Oh, wait, this is actually, I'm sorry, this isn't right. There we go. So I pull out my search params from that use search params method. So that should get me all the info I need here. And then I'm going to make another analytics call, but this time we're going to use the track method that you were talking about earlier, right? Now, this is something that I might want to change on the fly. So when I kind of was playing with this earlier, Joe, I used a product clicked for this. But this was a conversation we were having as well, right? Product clicked means something different in the e-commerce space. And since I'm coming out of a search interface, um, would it make more sense to do a product list clicked here instead?
You can call the event anything you want, really.
Okay.
That's the thing, and it doesn't really matter. Uh, if you want this event when it gets sent to Segment, if you wanted to trigger a certain mapping, which will then send data onto various different platforms, you can always reconfigure the event name in that mapping. So really, you can name your events anything you want.
Okay. So we'll keep it product clicked for now. But if I wanted to make that product list clicked, would that would just be essentially I would change that
Yeah.
mapping
Yes,
on the
that's right.
backside. Okay, cool. So product ID, we'll go ahead and grab that. That's again on our side, we call that an object ID. So we'll go ahead and put that in. But again, I could have called that object ID all the way through and then just changed my mapping appropriately. Um, because this is clicked from a search result, we really want to pass along that position information. This is going to be incredibly important for things like dynamic re-ranking, right? Where if we notice a pattern where your customers keep clicking on, say, the fifth result for a particular search, we might want to boost that result. So we want to make sure that we're getting that position information in there as well. And then the final piece of the puzzle here is, like I said, we need our index name. And this is ties back to that Algolia action that you have, right? So this is kind of a predefined name within the action. It's going to, if it sees the search index, it's going to pick that up and use it to inject into the insights call, right? Okay. Think I did it right? Should we give it a shot? So let's see. So theoretically now, if I go back over here and I click on here, I can see this tracking event now.
Okay, let's have a look at what it is. Okay, so the event name is product clicked, which is correct. And inside properties, we should have three items: product ID, position, and search index. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Is it worth maybe taking a look over on the segment side and seeing what happened?
Yeah, so we should expect to see an event in the segment source debugger called
Okay.
product.
So you can see I kind of cheated here. I've already got my Pokemon card demo as a source, and I've already got my Algolia Insights demo as a destination. So do I want to drill in here on my source?
And then click on debugger at the very top.
Here we go.
So the debugger will show you,
Ooh,
if you have hundreds of thousands of events coming in every minute, you're not going to see all of them here. But when you're developing, you'll tend to see them all.
very cool. Okay, so and there's my product clicked event. and I can see it picked up all of that information.
Yeah. And because it was fired from a browser, if you click on the raw payload, you'll see the user ID, the
Oh
anonymous ID,
yeah,
all that extra stuff, the sort of environment information like the page,
yeah,
URL, title, all that stuff.
this is cool. And we get the query ID separately, so it's not going to mess with your pathing and all of that good stuff. Love it. This is cool. And going a little bit further, if we come over into our Algolia dashboard now, and I go to my data sources, let's see if the demo gods are with me. We can see our click event here too. And there it is. And we can see everything translated across. So the object ID got mapped properly.
Yep.
We've got our position information and we've got our index information. So this is great. This is an insight event. We've got our click event. Just like when we set insights to true, we're getting the exact same insight. The difference is now it's coming through segment. It can go wherever else you want it to go as well. And it can be infused with whatever additional information that you need in order to update tracking, whatever you need for your merchandising dashboard or what have you. So this is
Shall we
awesome.
show,
Mhm.
shall we show just for a second how the mapping actually occurred on the segment side, just to dispel any thoughts of magic?
Absolutely. That's here in settings. Oh, no, wait, we got to go to the
No, it
destination.
will be, yeah, click on overview and go into your Algolia destination and
Okay.
click on mappings.
All right.
So these are all the different mappings that could have been invoked. One of them has been invoked. So which one is it? So what did we call the event? Product clicked.
Product
So,
clicked.
so if you click into that mapping and look at it and scroll down, we'll see that the product ID was populated, the Algolia product ID was populated from the segment properties.product ID part of the payload. And what else did we copy across? We sent
Okay.
over
The search index information. We've
text.
got
Yeah,
this positional information.
exactly. Yeah. So, if you had instrumented, instead of typing instead of sending properties.position on the segment side, if you said properties dot, item position, you could, if you had instrumented it as properties.item position, you could just come in here and change that. So click on that and
Ooh,
search there, type in properties.item position, for example,
item position like
and
that.
then click on the link. You see the little blue link there. Yeah, click that. So now
Oh,
segment would kind of expect that the position information would come in from properties.item position instead of properties.position. So it's
oh,
just,
cool.
whatever you instrument on your website, you can kind of correct any some of the instrumentation mismatches that you might have. You can remap all those fields here.
Cool. And I like these coalescings that are occurring here. So
Yeah,
if
so
you've
what
got
this
an
is saying is, yeah, this is basically saying if segment finds a user ID, it will send it to Algolia as the user token. But if there is no user ID there, it's going to look for the segment anonymous ID. So it's going to look for one bit of information. If it's not there, it falls back to using a different bit of information.
very cool. And so going back up one layer above that, if I decided that it actually made more sense for this to be a product list clicked, this would be where I would remap
Well,
that to that
you would
appropriate.
go exactly. So you would go back into your mapping. If you edit this mapping here, edit here, and then instead of product clicked there, you just type in product list clicked.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, we're getting close to time here, and I did promise everyone a conversion event. So let's go ahead and let's bring this home, and then we can answer any questions. I do see one question out here. What is the best practice to handpick the params we need or to send the whole product payload to segment and make the handpicking on the mapping? So I guess the question is, do you sort of pre-prune your events before you send them to segment, or do you just send as much data as you possibly can and then sort of allow segment to sort of select what it needs out of it?
Yeah, definitely don't send as much data as you can. With analytics, you should always be deliberate about what you collect.
Mhm.
You don't want to accidentally collect PII or any sort of information like that you're not going to need, or you don't need, or you don't have consent for example. So having a tracking plan, deciding in advance what are the bits of data you want to collect for each user interaction on your website or your mobile app. List that all out, call it a tracking plan, whatever you want, and then hand that to your engineer and say, this is what I want you to implement. Definitely don't just grab everything that's in everything that's in the DOM and drop it into a segment event. It's not a great idea.
All right. Well, you can see this is my little HandleClick function that was popping up that little alert box earlier. And I'm going to go ahead and do another analytics track. And I picked order completed for this one. I don't know if that's the best event for my Pokemon ball, but I feel like since I don't have a shopping cart, that's probably most representative of what's I expect to have happen when I come out of this. But obviously, your mileage will vary. If you had a shopping cart, you'd probably want an add to cart or something like that here, right? And so again, for those who've dealt with me doing these kind of conversion events before, there's 5 pieces of basic information we need here. We need an event name, we need an index name, we need a user, which we've already got out of segment. We need our product ID or product IDs. So here I'm going to just go ahead and since we've discussed this single Pokemon card, I'm going to go ahead and inject that in here, object ID. And then we need that query ID as well. And Joe, we didn't really talk about it. There was actually some work that you and I did where um, we were actually able to get Segment to extract that query ID out of the query string. Um, for now, I'm going to go ahead and just put this in just so folks can see it. But that is something, is that available at this point
Yep.
where they could actually do that?
Yes. So that's live. So um, segment is configured. It should be the version that you have right now to pick up the query ID from the query string, and it will automatically include it. It'll actually store it in local storage on the browser, and it will automatically send it with every segment event in the right location. So if you're doing a conversion event like this and you're using segment on your website, you probably don't need to worry about populating the query ID.
Awesome. Well, let me have it in there for now, and then maybe if we have a second at the end, we'll take it out and see if it continues to function properly. So I'm realizing the other half of this is I probably should, you know, pass that information into my event as well. So we're going to go ahead and modify our handle click here too, to just go ahead and pass that information along. Let's see, so I'll turn this into an anonymous function, and then we'll call handle click. And then we need our 3 pieces of data. So we need our object ID here. We need our, let's see, our query ID. So you can see this is kind of annoying. I've got to go ahead and extract it out of the query string. So this will be fun if I can pull that out and actually not need to pass that along anymore. I definitely appreciate that. Um, and then my index name is just this, right now it's just this cheat. I'm pulling it out of an environment variable, but that again, that might be an interesting thing to store and sort of retrieve later, particularly like if you've got multiple queries going on, right? Maybe someone's sitting on a couple of different tabs with different Pokemon cards trying to decide which one they actually want to buy or what have you. Let's see, one parsing error here. Where did I miss? Up at 43. Search prims, data object ID, search prims get query ID. That's not right. Uh, that should be, I think the braces got in there by accident. We'll take those out. See if that helps us. Data object ID. Yeah, you can tell I'm getting to the end of it.
Yeah,
What
you're
am I
missing
missing?
close a bracket after to close the handle click.
Uh, you're right. That's nope, that's not it.
And you
Where to?
brace after that.
Thank you. Cool. Haha. Thank you, Joe. And let's see what this gets us. So bring this back up. I've got my query ID up here, my positional information. Click my button, my tracking event. I've got an order completed now. Properties. Looks like all of my data got passed along, my search index, all of that. You don't need positional information when you're talking about conversion events. That's really just for improving search. Um, so I think we're in pretty good shape here. Should we see if it actually got passed along?
Right.
So I'm going to cancel out those changes. And then I go back to, I want to go back up to my source, right? And check the debugger.
So that doesn't have an order
Oh,
completed.
there it is. It's like you summoned it.
Yeah, a little
So,
bit temporary like that. Yeah.
so that looks good. And let's see if I go over to destinations. This thing is super cool, by the way. I wish we had more time to talk about it because I was trying to figure this one out, but let's go ahead and just go look at a event delivery here. It looks like it's coming through.
Yeah.
Hooray,
So
no
this,
errors. Hmm.
if there are errors, such as, let's say you forgot to include certain fields or something like that, it will tell you here.
Cool.
So if there were required fields that you needed to send for a certain mapping, it will warn you.
Cool. And Frederico's asking, can I quickly explain how we can use the query ID and position to help us re-rank the results? Frederico, so there is a couple of ways you can do it. One, this is data that could be used by a merchandiser to do it manually. But more importantly, there's a feature within Algolia called dynamic re-ranking, where we can actually consume this event information and look at it in aggregate and learn from that data and on the fly essentially re-rank the result set based on that click information, right? So literally, if you have a significant number of customers that are clicking on the fifth result for the search for blue jeans, dynamic re-ranking will see that data, that click information, that positional information, and will use that to re-rank that result higher into the result set to make sure that the next person that sees it, it comes up a little bit higher because we know that across the aggregate customer base, that's actually a more relevant result than we're giving it credit for. So hopefully that kind of gives you a quick answer to that question. And we can see the conversion event's actually over here, and it's actually been accepted. And you can see the kinds of things that we can use it for. So absolutely, we can use that for dynamic re-ranking. We can use that for neural search. So as we start to kind of have a semantic understanding of our product catalog, these events come into play and allow us to sort of help build those essentially those vectors, right? Those ties between different products and sort of understand the associations between them. And it even comes into play for things like recommendations, right? So we can start to see things like we're only doing a single product within this conversion event, but say I had 3 Pokemon cards in there, we can start to build associations between those cards. And that way we can do things like frequently bought together or show trends, right? So there's a ton of stuff we can show on the Algolia side with it. And that's not even getting into like pushing this data out through Segment to, other e-commerce tools or your e-commerce platform using Segment, right? Which I can only imagine the kinds of cool things that your customers are doing, Joe.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, just, this is one use case, sending the data to Algolia and taking action on it, to improve search results and recommendations and stuff like that. But yeah, you could be sending this data to your data warehouse. So all that order completed event would become columns and tables in your data warehouse. It could be sent to Google Analytics, Facebook, hundreds of different destinations.
Could be sitting up on a sales kind of SOC type of situation where you've actually got real-time analytics showing up right there in the customer service center or something like that. So very cool. Well, awesome. So Joe, is there any sort of recommendations you would have for the folks that are watching now, the folks that watch this later? What should they do next? I mean, I think looking at sort of these segment integrations, that's kind of a big piece of it, right?
It depends. I mean, if you're already a segment customer, there's a lot of resources that you can use to help improve. We publish a lot of best practices around how to build a tracking plan and implement it and stuff like that. If you're not a segment customer and you are thinking about it, one thing that you might want to think about is looking at our destination or our integration catalog to see how we support the platforms that you would want to connect segment to. Any questions at all that anybody has about either Algolia or Segment?
We've been doing a pretty good job of answering them as we go. Um, you know, I would definitely love to hear from folks. Obviously, I talk to a lot of Algolians. If you are a segment customer, I think the one thing that you should know is that Joe and I and some of the engineers on the Algolia side, there are active conversations right now about improving this integration, and bringing in some of the new features of Algolia, like conversion event subtypes, right? Differentiating between add to carts and purchase events, using some of this pricing information, right? Making sure that that's kind of getting passed along on all sides. So there's going to be, this is really just the beginning, I feel like, for this integration with Segment. I would say from my side, if you want to continue the conversation, reach out to me, come to the Algolia Discord server. We can chat there. I think, for Segment, Joe is reachable, or I can certainly put you two in touch if you have questions for certain. But I want to thank you all for sticking it out. I know we're a little bit over time here. We had surprising about the cover. I kind of came in thinking like I don't have a lot of code here, but boy, there was a lot to talk about. That's for sure. I want to thank Joe. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Did all the work.
Right on. And we'll see you all next time for the next live coding session. So take care. Bye, all.
Thanks, everyone.